Good morning, everyone. I know that you know that we're going through the book of Proverbs. We're going with Solomon and looking at practical issues that we have to face in our fallen world. Last week I spoke to you about laziness and work, and this week I'm speaking about debt and money. There's a certain irony that Doug would ask me to talk about money, but anyway, it is as it is. I don't know if you know, but I'm in business. And when people ask me what I do, I always tell them, well, most of the time I tell them, I'm a turnaround expert. I can take a very good business and turn it into a very mediocre business in a very short time. Some people are laughing. The people who are close to me aren't. The other thing that happens is young people sometimes come to me and ask for advice on investing, and I say, you've come to the right place. Just look at what I do and do the exact opposite, and you'll do very well. You're still shaking your head, Tess. Tess deals with all my finances, and Claire has to deal with the results of my finances. So the two of them were shaking their heads. And I noticed Kiffy was looking quite stern as well, but I'll leave that for now. But anyway, so we're looking at money, and we live in this world that tells us a lot about money. When you go through the bookstores at the airport, half the books are on money and how to manage your money. And the interesting thing is most of the time they're the guys who don't manage it very well. And a lot of songs are about money. And I find that it's our poets who often give us insight into what's really happening in our society, and particularly in the area of money. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to start the words of some songs. And I'm going to date all of you because you're going to have to tell me the song and where it comes from. So the first one is this one. I work all night, I work all day to pay the bills I have to pay. Oh, it's too soon. And I wanted to get money, money, money. Must be funny in a rich man's world. Money, money, money. Always sunny in the rich man. Okay, this one's going to go back a little bit further because there's some older folk here as well. I'll buy you a diamond ring, my friend, if it makes you feel alright. I'll get you anything, my friend, if it makes you feel alright. Because I don't care too much for money. Because money can't buy you love. Who's that from? The Beatles. You see, Carl's the one guy who would know it from. Okay, but look, I'll come back a little bit. Okay, to the guys in their 30s and 40s. We live in a greedy little world that teaches every little boy and girl to earn as much as they can possibly, then turn around and spend it foolishly. Lots of diamond rings, the happiness it brings. You'll live like a king with lots of money and things. It's such a beautiful thing, Kachin. Who knows that one? Do you not remember Shania Twain? Did you say Shania Twain?
I said the teens up there.
No, it's nothing. So the funny thing is about asking you to sing it, I really did want to sing it, but the guys in my family always asked me to stop because I sing a lot at home. And you won't believe this, I'm an expert in that as well, is that I can change the words and the tunes of very well-known songs. So I won't carry on with that. Just one or two more of this, because I think they're all interesting because they're all pointing at the same things. It's not about the money, money, money. We don't need your money, money, money. We just want to make the world dance. Forget about the price tag. It ain't about the ka-ching, ka-ching. It ain't about the ba-bling, ba-bling. Who knows that one? Jessie J. Gee, sure.
What?
You only know that if you're young or if you've got young children.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're young.
You're young. Okay, now this is my last one, and this is my favorite one because it's from our era, Paul, when we were at UCT. In fact, it was almost the anthem at UCT. Now look at them yo-yos. That's the way you do it. You play the guitar on the MTV. That ain't working. That's the way you do it. Money for nothing and your chicks for free. Hey? And dire straits. You see. But isn't it interesting that they all point to the problem? Our society points to the problem, but actually our society doesn't respond to the problem. We've been going for so long, and I think I said it last week, we don't get it right. The world has the same problems, and we repeat the same problems over and over. And one of those things has to do with money. Now, the icon in sport of our generation is Tiger Woods. And I don't know if you know it, but in 2010 he had a car accident, and on the back of this, all of his life was exposed to the public. And it was a mess. We saw in the headlines of all the papers about his infidelity. And I think he was really honest. And this is what he said when he was interviewed afterwards. Thanks to money and fame, I didn't have far to go to find temptations. I was wrong. I was foolish. I don't get to play by different rules. The same boundaries that apply to everyone apply to me. I knew the rules, but I thought they didn't apply to me. Isn't that poignant? Isn't that so insightful into how it is with money? I knew the rules, I just didn't think they applied to me. Now, within the church, we don't often speak about money. I can honestly say this is the first time that I've been involved in any sermon about money. The churches that do talk about money usually want your money, and then the churches that don't want to are embarrassed by the churches that do. And we know their reasons for talking about money. But it's interesting to me that the Bible talks about money a lot of the time. In fact, there are over 2,000 times that money is mentioned in the Bible. Money is mentioned much more than hell or heaven. It's a big theme in the Bible. Now we need to know the God who created all the world, who holds the stars in his hands. The cattle on 1,000 hills are his. He doesn't need our money. He doesn't need anything. He's absolutely self-content and self-contained in and of himself. He's the almighty and creating God. He's not sitting at the door saying, well, I hope Nigel brings his money because we're not going to be able to carry on our ministry if he doesn't bring his money. God doesn't need my money. So why then, if God doesn't need my money, why does it become such a big issue in the scriptures? Well, the reason is that we have a God in heaven who loves us. And he knows that our hearts and the way that our hearts respond to money reflects where we are, reflects the condition of our soul. It is in the area of money that we often reflect most what we feel about God. And so the Bible says you cannot serve God and you can't serve money at the same time. And we see that there seems to be a darkness about money, but at the same time, money is never called evil. It's the love of money that is evil. And so I said it to you last time when I recorded the message for Doug, and I hope some of you listened to it. I said that when I come to bring a message for all of you, I honestly believe God is speaking to me. I'm hoping that in him speaking to me, there might be a message for you. I believe, as the church believes, that God's word has great power, that it speaks into our hearts. Doug and Carl and Simon, their mandate to me is always very clear. They don't want to hear about my ideas. They want to know what the scriptures say about money. And so I'm praying that in this time of speaking about money, it would be inspiring to you, that you would know more about God, that you would find that you want to honor him more, that you would love him more, that you'd be led by him more. You see, the first principle that we need to know is that in honoring God, that's where we find our greatest joy. The Westminster Catechism put it like this: what is the chief end of man? The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Doug always knows what John Piper says, and he might have to correct me, but it was something like, God is most honored when we glorify him most. You tell me, Doug. Anyway,
is to glorify God by enjoying him.
God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. That's what Piper says. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. You see, the two things, honoring God and our greatest joy, are joined together at the hip. When God is talking to us about money, it's not because he wants to take our money away from us. He's talking to us about money because he wants to have us even greater joy, for us to have even greater joy. He wants us to invest in things that are eternal, that have lasting hope and joy. He's not wanting us to feel, oh heck, I've got to give some more money. It's exact opposite. He's a father and a good father in heaven who wants only the best from us. I have the privilege of having been brought up in a loving family. I knew for sure that my mum and dad, everything they did for us was because they loved us and they wanted the best. So sometimes they'd have to stop us, and other times they'd have to encourage us. Before we even start this morning, we must understand that there's a perfect Father in heaven who loves us and who cares for us and who can see the whole picture. He doesn't put up smoke and mirrors like the world and the devil do. He's not sending us down a dead-end street. He's sending us down a path to the greatest joy and the greatest hope. And that is where the two things come together. When we look at money overall, in honoring God is going to be where we find our greatest joy. That's the first principle. So I'll tell you what we're going to do this morning. We're going to look at the foundation for our biblical view on money. Then we're going to go to a few scriptures. Then I'm going to go to some practical advice, if I can give it. It'll be from what I've done wrong, not from what I've done right. And then finally, we're going to do something that's so unusual. We're going to go to what our text was in Proverbs chapter 6. And that's how we're going to conclude. So it's a little bit the wrong way around, but you'll see as we go through. So we're going to start off by saying, what's the biblical basis for our view of money? And if you have your Bibles, I would like you to go to Mark chapter 12, verses 13 to 17. And this is to give us a biblical perspective on money. Mark chapter 12, verse 13 to 17. Later, they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. "Why are you trying to trap me?" he asked. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought the coin and he asked them, "Whose image is this? And whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's." And they were amazed at him. I know you've heard the story often. But to me it's interesting that you have this group of guys who come in to trap Jesus. They want to get to one of those got you moments where they're going to draw him in. I would imagine what they're trying to do is they're trying to get him to say, either you don't pay your taxes, or otherwise you do. If they say you don't pay your taxes, they're going to go to the Romans and they're going to say this guy doesn't submit to the Romans, to the Roman Empire. And if they say they do, he's going to say, well, he's not a proper Jew because his allegiance is to Rome. They're trying to trap him. They're trying to have one of those got you moments. We see it on TV so often these days with these presentations. And he answers in this strange way. He says, "Whose inscription is on the coin?" And if you know your history, it would have been Augustus's inscription, and he would have been made to look like a god with a small g. And he says to them, "Whose inscription is on the coin?" And they say, "Caesar's." So he says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." I think it's very, very clear. He's saying, pay your taxes. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's. I don't think it's saying anything else. I wish I could find a way around it because it would help me a great deal. But I think what he's saying is pay your taxes. But I don't think that that's the main message. Because he says, render unto God what is God. What is God's? And remember, he's just talked about images. And then the question is well, where's God's image? Who's been made in God's image? Where would we find God's image? And the answer is on your and my heart. We're made in the image of God. And so he's saying to us, render unto God what is God's. Render your hearts to God. It is not possible for us to even carry on in this biblical understanding of money unless we first go to the place where we know where our hearts are. Are we convinced that Jesus is Lord? Are we convinced that he's worthy of our hearts? Are we sure? Is he the chosen one? Is he the Messiah? Is he God incarnate, come as a man? Is he the one who died on the cross for our sins? Were we a little bit worthy? Did I provide a little part of my salvation? He did some and I did some of the other stuff. Was I a little bit good? I think for all of us, when Jesus shines his light into our hearts, we can say with honesty and earnestly, with Paul, I'm the worst of sinners. In saying that, I'm not saying that I've done all the bad things that I could have done, but I'm saying that the God who made me in his image, is the very God who I've turned my back on either in rebellion or indifference. The more I think about it, the more insulting of the two is indifference. Where I say, God, did you really say? Do you have authority over me? Are you the one who I should submit to my life? Yes, maybe you made everything. But I treat you with indifference. I'll come to you when I need to come to you. It'll be on my time. I'll create you in my image. I'll make you fit in with my lifestyle. You see, we need to decide, is the image of Christ in our hearts? That's the starting point. We won't have any idea of what to do with money until we come to that point where we say, Jesus, I owe you everything. I owe you for my life. I was not born because I deserved it. I was born because you gave it to me. I was born again because you died on the cross for me. Not one drop of my own righteousness, but all of your righteousness. What you did on the cross was sufficient for me. We have to decide. Is it Jesus' image that's written on our hearts? That's the first part, because Jesus says to us in this text, render unto God what is God's. Render your heart and your mind and your soul wholeheartedly to God. That's what he's saying. So that's the basis of our understanding. If we don't know that, then the rest of what the Bible says about money won't make any sense to us. This is a message for people who've given their hearts to Jesus. So we come to the second thing where we're going to go through some key Bible verses. And the one that struck me first was in Ecclesiastes. I don't know when you last read Ecclesiastes, but I found it intriguing. Chapter 5, beginning at verse 10. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to their owners, except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I've seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. And then I'm jumping, but I'm going straight to verse 19. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions, and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. I know you're very sensible, and I know you will look at these things and you'll dwell on them in your hearts, but I just want to draw out a few things from there. The first one, whoever loves money does not have enough. It was so interesting as I was reading about this that Rockefeller, the wealthiest man in the world in his time, was asked, when will you have enough? And he answered, when I've got a little bit more. That's the problem with money. If we love money, it's never quite enough. It's close to enough, but it's never quite enough. When we've got what we aimed for, we find that it's not quite where we want to be. See, we never attain enough money. Rockefeller had insight. The right amount is just a little bit more. And then it says to except to feast your eyes on. So you can have all of these things, but the only benefit you get is to feast your eyes upon them. When I was a little guy, we watched the film Oliver. Did anybody watch Oliver? Oliver Twist. And do you remember the time when he's taken by the Artful Dodger and he's brought to Fagin and you've got to pick a pocket or two? I think it goes something like that. And then later on, Oliver is walking and he comes into the room and there's Fagin. And he's looking at all of his treasures. And he says, Oliver, isn't it wonderful to just look on all of these treasures? There's something quite insightful in it. He can't do anything with the treasures. He can just look at them. And we know who Fagin is in the story. He's this miserable old man. But the problem is that the world that we live in drives us to be like Fagin. It drives us to want to have more. And yet when we have the more, it doesn't bring us any more pleasure. It actually just brings more responsibility. And all we can do is just look on it. There's all this stuff. We just gather stuff. I mean, one of the liberating things for Claire and I was when we lost everything, because we realized that most of the stuff had no value, because it's just stuff. And we carry on and we just build up this more and more stuff, and what we realize is it's starting to capture our souls. And we end up like Fagin, where we can just look on it. We have to be careful, because it goes on to say it permits him no sleep. Isn't it interesting that the honest laborer can sleep, and the rich man who's worrying about his wealth can't sleep? Does it worry you sometimes about your sleep and what's causing you not to sleep? It's something that I had to look into my heart about when the times were that I didn't sleep. The things in life that give us great joy are often in the opposite direction of what we think they are. But things like sleep have enormous value. When we sleep well, it seems to make everything else work well. But that's not what our world tells us. We must be careful that we're guided by the scriptures, that we can have good sleep. And the next thing that I found interesting is wealth is lost through misfortune, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. Anybody who's involved in schools can see what happens to children when they're entitled. We have to be very careful that the standards that we set are passed on to our children, especially with regard to money. It's very upsetting to me when you see in our world at the moment how children react to money, where they think that it grows on trees. From last week, where they don't realize that there needs to be work to attain money, and that money is a gift. You see, the principle about money in the Bible is that who does it actually in the end belong to? Whose money is it? Did I earn my money because I was very talented? And then where would that talent have come from? You see, all money belongs to God. But I find that my default is that when things go well for me, especially in business, I boast. And when things go badly for me in business, I blame. That's the default position, I think, of most of us. We don't ever fear money. We don't ever fear the effects of money. We don't ever concern ourselves with what's going to happen when we have a love of money. But the Bible teaches us over and over again, be careful. Be careful what you teach your children. No matter how wealthy you are, make sure that they are respectful of money and that they realize it's a gift. And then he goes on to talk about nakedly depart, and I'm sure we've all heard those at a funeral. And if you take funerals as I do, what you do see is you see a body, and it's lifeless. And they've dressed up the body. But the body takes nothing with it. From dust we were, and to dust we shall go. We're just these floating particles of dust in a giant universe. Isn't it extraordinary that that's who we are, and yet God has chosen us to love us? We were small and meaningless in this giant universe. I don't know how somebody can live where they don't believe in God. Because what purpose is there? But God in his goodness goes and takes the particle of dust floating around in the universe, and he brings it to be his very own. Where he says, you'll be my child. You'll be part of my family. I'll call you friend. You'll call me dad. Isn't that quite extraordinary? Isn't that the beauty of the gospel? And it's in light of that he's coming to us and telling us what we should do with money. And then the final bit I find the most interesting of the lot, where he says, moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. There's nothing that is as beautiful as content Christians. Content for the place where they are. If they are Christians who are making their treasures in heaven, the things of this world will grow strangely dim. We need to be Christians who are godly with contentment. Paul says to Timothy in chapter 6, people of corrupt mind who've been robbed of the truth and who think that godliness is a means to financial gain. But he says, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Jesus says to us, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And he goes on in verse 24, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus is saying to us, there's a right kind of investment. There's an eternal investment. What's going to happen to your money in 30 million years' time? What's going to happen to your money in 1,000 years' time? What the scriptures tell us is the money that we present to Jesus is the money that's an eternal investment. How much joy have you got from stuff? I've found, maybe it's over a period of time, but I've found that my joy is in relationships. My joy is in playing tennis with my friends and playing golf. My joy is in all of the things that are revolved around fellowship with other people. And actually in my life it's made very little difference whether things have been going well or badly, so long as our relationships are intact. I was playing golf with Paul and I was asking Paul what he was going to do after he left Rosawi. I hope I'm not oversharing Paul. But it was interesting, Paul's response. He said, I don't want to sound super spiritual, but I want to do what serves the kingdom the most. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, Paul, but that's kind of what Paul was saying. You see, I would have imagined that somebody who's been a headmaster of a school has the right to go and retire in Honolulu. If you've had to deal with that many parents for that long, I think you deserve retirement. But when your treasures are in another place, your decisions are based on those treasures. We don't retire. I said last week we're going to work throughout eternity. We're just going to find the right way to work. And Paul hit it on the head for me. We work for his glory. And then it brought both things together. When we work for Jesus' glory, we have our greatest joy. These two things that are joined at the hip. When we glorify and honor God, we are the most happy people in the room. I always say to the kids at Rosawi and at Springvale, I always know who's the happiest person here. I don't know any of you, but I know who's the happiest. Because the one who's serving is the happiest. The one who hasn't been captured by this world is the happiest. And it applies to adults as well. The happiest person in this room is the one who leaves this door and has decided they're going to serve God. Isn't it interesting in that story of the rich young ruler, where he comes to Jesus, he's just the model. He's the guy I would want to have as my son-in-law. He's good at business, he's a leader, he's an honorable guy, he honors his mother and father, he does everything right. And Jesus says to him, go and sell everything and follow me, and he goes away sad. This is an honorable guy, this isn't some skeleton. This is a good guy. And yet he's been deceived by wealth, that it's attracted his heart away from the God of this world towards mammon. I find that an interesting story, that wealth sets up this fence that becomes a barrier between us and God. And then his disciples said to him, but this is a hard teaching. Because remember, he's just said it's impossible for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. And he says, what's impossible with man is possible with God. You see, if you're here this morning and you're starting to have a feeling that I need to overhaul my attitude towards money, then you're in the right place, because that's exactly where I am. And as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking to myself, but how do we do it? How do I open my eyes? How do I get through the mist? How can I ignore all the smoke and mirrors? And Jesus says, what's impossible with man is possible with God. So like I said last week, the place that we go is to our knees. God can change our lives. He saved us from our sin, and he continues to work with us. He doesn't give up on us. He continues to work with us. And in his goodness, he can reform your attitude to money for your good and for your joy. And that's what I think is the goal for all of us. I've got on to part 3. I hope I'm not going too far. Just quickly, just a few rules. And I want to say that these came from John Wesley, which I found really, really interesting. He said, with your money, first of all, feed your family. That's interesting. He said, feed your family. Now, what you consider to be feeding your family might be different to mine, and I have no interest in prying into your financial affairs. But I would say that between you and God, you should decide what it means to feed your family. It means probably going to school, probably going to university, making sure that they're clothed, all of those things. Isn't it interesting that this great spiritual man, his first priority is, he says, feed your family. And where did he get that from? He got it from the scriptures. With your money, the very first thing that you do before you go and donate to any church, feed your family. And then he says the second thing, this really shook me. He said, go and pay your debts. Go and pay your debts. Don't live with debt. Make sure you've paid off your debt. That's quite hard for a modern family, where you're paying off university and school and all of the stuff that we all know about. But he says, go and pay off your debts. I find that amazingly practical. Claire and I were walking around the school and we were reminiscing about our time. And the one thing above all else that created stress in our lives was debt. We never felt settled when there was debt. And John Wesley must have known the same things, because he said, go and pay your debts. So the first thing is feed your family. The second thing is pay your debts. And then the third thing is feed the church. Those were his priorities, feed the church. And the interesting thing about his life is that when he started working at Oxford, he earned £30 a month. That's 200 years ago, so it's probably like 30,000 US now, realistically. But that's what he earned a year. And he worked out that it cost him £28 a year to live. So he spent £28 on living, and he gave £2 to the church. The next year he was promoted, and he got given £60. So he spent £28 on living, and he spent £32 on feeding the church. Then he began to write, and the royalties from his books earned him £1,500, which people say would be like about $3 million now. And he lived on £28, and he gave £1,500 to the church. Isn't it an interesting example that that's how John Wesley lived? I was reading a story about Rick Warren. Now, I'm not involved in his theology or anything, but the interesting thing for me was that out of his one book, The Purpose-Driven Life, is that what it's called? I think it is. He made $30 million, and apparently he makes $3 million every year from then on. But he and his wife prayed about it, and they decided that they didn't want anything to change. So he's on the same salary, he's driving the same Ford, and he's in the same house as he was before his book sold. And he's delighted. He feels he's made the best investment ever. There's a message in all of that. So we go back to what he's saying. Feed your family, pay your debt, feed the church. As simple as that. I think that's something that in our private time with God, that's what we decide ourselves. So I want to finish by where we were supposed to start, which is the text that you gave me, Doug, which is Proverbs chapter 6. This is where we're going to finish. So if you bear with me 5 more minutes, we're done. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 1 to 5. My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, if you've shaken hands and pledged for a stranger, you have been trapped by what you said and snared by the words of your mouth. Do this, my son, to free yourself. Since you have fallen into your neighbor's hands, go to the point of exhaustion and give your neighbor no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. The text is exactly what the text says. If you find yourself in debt, if you're beholden to anybody, just go and pay the debt. Do whatever you have to do. Don't have any sleep until you've paid off the debt. But I don't think that's the main message of what he's saying. Because straight away it asked me the question, who am I in debt to the most? Who do I owe more than anybody else? And it was obvious to me. I owe God everything. I owe him all of myself. And in the same way that we carry physical debts in this world and they burden us and they cause tension in our lives, the debt that we owe to God, unless it's paid for, it dwells with us. It's like a dark cloud that covers all of our lives. It's stopping us being with him. It's stopping us having the greatest joy. And so it is that over these last 2 months, I've been thinking over and over about the cross. And it was a big theme in our service this morning. Now, thinking about this amazing story that Jesus would come and he'd have supper with his disciples and he would say, "Take, eat, this is my body given for you. Take this in remembrance of me. Take this cup and drink of it in remembrance of me." He knew where he was going. He was saying this before it happened. He knew he was going to die. And I've said it to you before, what was so unusual about this death? Why did he sweat blood? Was it a metaphor? Why in the garden did he go through all of the trauma and the tension and the turmoil that he went through in the garden? Why did he do those things? We know there have been many Christians who've gone to their death willingly and with great joy and singing hymns. Was Jesus not as brave as them? Was he not as faithful as them? What was it about him? What happened that he came onto the cross and there was this enormous toil? Why did he say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why was there darkness over the whole land? Why did the earth shake? Why was the curtain torn in two? And then why at the end of all of this did he say it is finished? And those are the words that I want you to leave this place this morning. It is finished. And the answer is because he took the wrath that was deserving of all of us in full. It is finished. When I come before him at judgment, will I be judged on anything? No, because it is finished. He paid for it in full. There was not one bit that he didn't pay for. This Jesus who died on the cross, who was separated from the Father, who felt the full wrath of God, paid my price in full. And if I want to have the burden of guilt and the judgment of guilt taken away from me, the place that I go is to him, because it is finished. It is finished. It is finished in full. It is totally finished. The debt has been paid. We started at the place where we said we need to go to Jesus first. We need to have our hearts changed. I don't know where you are this morning, but I would suggest that if you're not a Christian yet, or you've been a Christian for 40 years as I have been, the place that you should go is to ask Jesus again to remind you of the great sacrifice that he made for all of us and said, it is finished. It is done once and for all. There's a great power in the cross. There's a great relief in the cross. It's a real and it's a personal thing. Myrna and Gordon wouldn't know this, but when they came in this morning, I got goosebumps. Myrna's dad befriended my dad 50 years ago. And he led him to the Lord. My dad didn't have anything to do with spiritual things. But in faith, Myrna's dad led my dad to the Lord. I think about half of the campus were led by my dad to the same Lord. All of our families certainly were influenced greatly by our dad. The message of the gospel is incredibly powerful. The message of the gospel brings all of us great joy. We need to come to that point this morning, whoever we are, where we say, this is the time, Jesus, where I give you my all. Your image is on my heart, and I desire that you take control of all of my life. You saved me, but today you are Lord of all. Amen.